There is simply no way to properly introduce our next speaker. The facts are these. A graduate of Syracuse University with advanced degrees from the University of Michigan and Clark University, she is taught as a university professor of geography, sociology, journalism, and everything else you can think of. Lectured before academic audiences on 4 continents, acted as advisor to one of the world's leading encyclopedias, and is contributing editor to the Review of the News. In addition, she was this year almost single-handedly responsible for the removal of tax deductibility from the revolutionary activities of Jerry Rubin, and has only just returned from researching another sensational story which appears in the Review of the News out tomorrow, exposing the granting of a U.S. military base by lease and rental in Maryland to the use as a summer camp for embassy children of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Susan Eliam Huck.
Well, I think I got off lightly, considering what happened to other speakers here. I certainly enjoy being up here. This is the first time I've been a speaker at one of these rallies, and I look down on all the people I work for here. And one of the things I thought I'd talk to you about this morning is some of the adventures and misadventures I've gotten into while doing these articles. First of all, though, while Gary was speaking, I thought of a few things I'd like to add. I must say, it's true that Scott Stanley is constantly on duty. I have never called him any time or place that he wasn't working on one or the other of these magazines. And it's sort of exhausting to contemplate how he works. I frequently tell people I have 2.5 jobs. Then everybody thinks that the half job is the one that I'm doing. So it's... Well, I do sort of have 2.5 jobs, and some of them only get half done, of course. But I work pretty hard for you in my spare time. Scott Stanley has more or less made a reporter out of me. I used to write, but I didn't go out there and do what reporters do. I thought I didn't have time since I was teaching full-time. And then he kept goading and pushing and ridiculing and so on. And I finally got out there where the action is and started talking to the people who make news. And I used to be impressed with them until I spoke to them. And it's a good way to lose your illusions, you know. So now there's sort of happy when I can pick up the phone and harass some State Department scoundrel for you. And this happens fairly often. Well, the way I began to become a reporter was doing telephone interviews. Now, Scott has heard these stories I'm going to tell you over the years, and he'll probably think of others I should have mentioned, but I didn't remember. I started out really doing interviews by telephone primarily because I couldn't extract from him the money to go places. Well, he said, use the phone. You know? So I've run him up some fairly astronomical long-distance bills, but it's nothing compared to what the transportation and expenses and so on would have been. Well, there were other advantages to telephone interviews, too. In the first place, I used to be shy, and this way I could always feel that in an instant I could flee. I could just push a little button, and it was all over, you know? Well, that rarely became necessary. And then also I have what I call a straight face problem. If I'm really putting somebody on, I tend to smirk at least. I can't keep a straight face if I'm doing a job on somebody, and I think it's fun. But on the phone, they can't see my face, see? So that helps. And then I can take notes, too, freely, without them becoming upset about it or even knowing. And there's something else, too. Sometimes you speak to people who, if they knew who you were, they wouldn't speak to you. So very early in the game, I invented what I call my 10-cent identities, 10 cents being the price of a phone call originally. And so I used to think to myself, now, since they wouldn't speak to me, what sort of person would they speak to? And I would invent a 10-cent identity. And very often I would simply introduce myself as a professor of sociology. You really didn't have to go any further than that. Nobody has ever heard of a professor of sociology who's not a raving lib. So, so I'd give my real name. Of course, they never heard of me, fortunately. And then I'd say, I'm a professor of sociology, and I have had the misfortune to teach sociology, I guess, for 2 years. And then I would just bandy jargon with them, you see, and act pretty much like a sympathetic fellow professional in this thing. And very often they really open up. And then, of course, flattery will get you everywhere, too, especially if it's a gentleman on the line. You more or less imply, oh, you're so brilliant, and what are you going to do after that, you know? And they may end up spilling everything. This really did happen with a research director for the Eisenhower Commission on Violence, the Milton Eisenhower Commission, Franklin Zimring. I imagine he's still hearing about it because he just fell with his hook, line, and sinker. And he finally came out with this perfect quote, which was really worth its weight in gold. I asked him why they were going to all this elaborate business of proving that it's really dangerous to have a gun because, then the fellow might shoot you who is burglarizing your home. And, they were going into quite a lot of research which both of us realized was a bit phony, and we were joking about how phony it was, you see, sympathetically, of course. And then I finally asked them, well, why are people so reluctant to answer your questions? And he said, quote, it's because we're coming to get their guns, unquote. Well, of course, you will never find this in the report of the Eisenhower Commission on Violence, but you'll find it in my article on the Eisenhower Commission on Violence. And I thought that was a real gem. I'm sure he has regretted it ever since. But, then I started also going to different places. One of the ways that I get to travel, incidentally, we do have a tight budget, and what I did, I very cleverly enslaved my sister to Pan American Airlines. And so once a year, I get a discount ticket that would stagger the imagination. No, I mean, I don't think you can imagine an 80% discount, but it really does a lot for you. So if you find that I'm writing articles from the end of the world, don't worry that they're overpaying me or anything. It's nothing like that, you know. I don't think Scott cares if I have to hitchhike home. I really don't. But, the on-site reporting began, I think, in the Dominican Republic, and I learned a lot about Latin American politics down there. I sort of sit in a corner and watch them at it. It's a lot less subtle and sophisticated than ours, and you have to duck now and then. But it's really a nice basic education. And then I think one of the stories Scott likes best of all is when I went chasing gorillas in Colombia in South America. And I had an extra advantage there besides the cheap ticket. I had my girlfriend's husband was the brother of the Minister of Defense. So I was able to go there and get this perfectly delightful document on official paper which said that I was really a good one and take good care of me and so on. So armed with this and a lot of optimism, I went out to the Central Andes, which were crawling with sort of bandit-type guerrillas, under a fellow named Tiro Fijo, who is fairly famous in revolutionary circles. And I found out as I got closer and was listening to stories that he's pretty vicious, too. And my feet were dragging toward the end there. You know, I kept thinking, gee, you know, he might decide to hold me for ransom, and then I'll find out what I'm really worth. And, and it seemed like a poor way to find out. But eventually I got so far out in the boonies that I thought, well, I think this is far enough. I was beginning to notice these little gravestones along the road, which were, no, they really were memorializing people who had been killed by Tiro Fijo's gang. So I thought, well, I think this is far enough. And I went up to the nearest garrison, little captain in the Colombian army, and I whipped out my document, thinking, well, now he's got to take care of me because I'm obviously so important, that he can't let me rot in some inn or other. Well, he looked at that document, and he could read all right. He was a pretty clever fellow. And he said to himself, nobody with that much influence would come out here. So I got a very poor welcome. I got locked in a nunnery for about 2 days. And believe me, it's true what they say about the beds in there. The mattresses were solid mahogany. And about every 15 minutes you'd turn over and mortify another piece, Well, meanwhile, this captain was on the radio trying to go through all the channels up to Bogota and find out who I really was. Well, after about 2 days, he did get religion, and he came along with very profuse apologies and everything. Well, by that time, I'd had quite enough of his little village, but I still had a job to do, so I did it quickly. And then I was going to leave. Well, you leave by a little jitney-type bus. It's a thing about the size of a VW bus, and it contains, about 38 Indians, 6 pigs, 88 bags of oranges, and it's just totally unbelievable what these things carry. And since we were so far out, it was going to leave at 1 a.m. in the morning in order to get to market by 6 a.m. See, it was a 5-hour jounce to the nearest place with a market. So I was standing out there. They supplied me with a guard with a shotgun. I said, oh, is this because of the guerrillas? And they said, oh, no, it's perros bravos. It's wild dogs. I suppose they come scavenging through the village at night, and you collect all the babies and things, lock them up. And I should have told you about breakfast. I said, what's for breakfast? They said, oh, café y masas. That's coffee in lumps. And seeing as how by then I was a special guest, I was horrified to discover they took some dirty rag and they gave all the dishes an extra swipe, just grease them up real good for me. Well, I get into some good ones. I suppose I could go on forever, but I won't. I have also chased deserters in Sweden for you. They're a lot less dangerous, I might say. And then at home, well, my closest call, really, to getting high was when I was jammed absolutely tight in a crowd at the March on the Pentagon, and I was inhaling everybody else's marijuana. And, I was in there like this. You absolutely couldn't move, and there it went. Everybody was lighting up. It was just like being in a subway, and everybody was smoking the stuff, and I was, heavens, what's going to happen to me? What? Well, it's all right. I was getting it pretty diluted, I guess. I almost got clubbed by a prison guard there. I felt like making some wise remark to him, and then I came up short. I bit my tongue, and I thought, no, I'm afraid that he just might smash me right in the teeth with his billy club, and that would be a silly thing to lose my front teeth about. But they were really vicious, And, well, you've heard about Jerry Rubin. This article that I have coming up, I have to tell you one more. I've never forgotten the man who decided that I was irrelevant, and therefore he was going to cut off my head. That was Herman Jasper in Plainfield, New Jersey, and the story was such a bore up to then. He really helped make the story. Things perked up after that. It was a good omen. But, well, this one that's coming out tomorrow, the Navy actually obtained control of a strategic communications station from the Army and immediately leased it to the Soviet embassy. And when I spoke to the lieutenant commander who was in charge of this thing, well, of course he's a flunky, but he was the person who had immediate charge of it, he said, well, at least we know where they are, isn't that right? And I said, yes, they're in your sandbox playing with your radio station. Well, I think my time is about up, but I'll probably have more stories if I meet you informally. So on to the next speaker. Thank you.